Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you'll get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books for $10 paperback, $2.99 ebook download, including my bestseller, NYPD Laughing in the Line of Duty. Today's episode, we're going to kind of change things up. It's not really true crime. He's a cameraman who worked on such iconic movies as Mean Streets, Taxi Driver, and The Terminator. He's written a great book called What the Camera Didn't See, A Cameraman's Journey from Denmark, Spain, Hollywood, and the Caribbean and Back. I'd like to welcome our special guest, Alec Hirschfeld. Alec, how are you doing this morning?
Great, Vic. Really great to be on with you.
I really appreciate it. Like I was telling you, okay, this is an honor for me to meet somebody like you. I'm a huge fan of 1970s, 1980 films. It seems to me, like from what little we talked and I was looking at your book, that you had a front row seat on the greatest show on earth back then.
Well, back then I was an assistant cameraman, who's a person who the prime responsibility is keeping things in focus. So you sit next to the lens on the camera. The operator's in the back looking through the finder. You're actually right next to the lens, so you're seeing just what the camera sees. You'd see it's actually the place where the director would love to sit, but he'd be in the camera assistant's way. So yes, it's really the best seat in the house. Unfortunately, and I'll just throw in a little technical stuff, it's not that way anymore, because with the advent of digital cameras, the camera assistants all work off of little video monitors. So they don't have to sit next to the camera anymore. Sometimes they're not even in the same room. And I feel bad for these guys because I was able to develop a rapport with actors because I was the face right there next to the lens. So they, it came to natural after 8 or 10 weeks in a movie, you develop a relationship. I think today that probably doesn't exist.
Well, like you said, technology just kind of phases people out of the equation.
Yeah, very much.
When you were a cameraman, how many hours a day did you work on a movie set? I mean, I know it's union, but how did that work?
Well, it was always a lot of work, always a lot of hours. When I started in the business, you had a straight time for 8 hours, and then you went right to double time. And if you didn't break for a meal every 5 or 6 hours, there was a penalty for that. If you worked at night, the 8 hours became 6 hours, and then you went on overtime. So the hours were fairly manageable. I would think 10 or 12-hour days would be about the maximum. Today, not the case, because they've changed the contracts to make it a little more favorable for the producers. And I know I have friends that are still on the sets, and they are happy to work a 12-hour day, if that's all it was, 14-hour days. And then as the week goes on, you keep getting pushed a little bit later and later because you want an extra hour there on Wednesday night. So Thursday morning you come in an hour later, and then you add that hour on the end of the day. By the time Friday comes along, they have what the guys now call Fraturday. Because if you're working on Friday, you're not going to be finished until Saturday.
What inspired you to write this book? Because it looks fascinating. And again, the name of the book is called What the Camera Didn't See, A Cameraman's Journey from Denmark, Spain, Hollywood, the Caribbean, and Back. What inspired you to write? I'm sorry?
May I show you a copy?
Absolutely, please.
There we go.
Is that a young Alec Hirschfeld?
It is definitely a young me. And I'm very proud to say I'm just about to kiss my favorite actress, Jamie Lee Curtis.
Now, how cool
we did
is
a movie
that?
together called My Love Letter, or called Love Letters. It was released as Love Letters. A Roger Corman film, kind of low budget. And in the back, that's in Spain in a movie called Doc. The photograph is by Brian Hamill, whose brother was the writer Pete Hamill.
Oh, well,
and his brother also was a writer for Law and Order right these days.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I digress.
Tell me about your book.
I've always liked writing short stories. So I thought, let me write a short story about something that I've done. I've always done stories about sailing because for a while I was a sailing captain. But I thought, let me write about Taxi Driver because that's the movie that's one of the most well known. So I wrote a story called Partly Truth, Partly Fiction, which, if you remember, that's a quote out of the book, out of the movie Taxi Driver. And I kind of approached it that way. I was going to embellish a little bit for dramatic effect, but basically tell my story of working on the film. And when I was finished, I thought, first, I never really had to embellish anything because it was all there. I mean, Robert De Niro, Harvey Keitel, Marty, there's lots of stories to tell, and it was a lot of a great experience. Like I told you, you sit right next to the lens as your camera assistant. So when Bob says into the mirror, "Are you talking to me?" He's talking to me. That's how it felt. Anyway, back to your question. I finished
that scene. You were
I was there. Yeah.
Wow.
I was the camera assistant sitting next to the lens while Bob is looking in a mirror into the lens. So it was it kind of blew me away.
Research. I did a little research to interview you, and I was watching Scorsese YouTube videos as he was explaining that. I think he said the assistant director wanted him to wrap that up, and De Niro just kept going with the "You talking to me? You talking to me?" And he goes, "Leave him alone. Just let him go. This is getting good."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true. There really wasn't anything in the script for that scene. It just says he looks in the mirror. So, as I recall, I don't recall this, to be honest, at the time, but I know I've heard about it later, and then it kind of rang a bell. Marty says to Bob, he says, "I don't know, just do something." That was the direction. Just do something. And so that's what we got. It was like spine tingling. Everybody in the set, when it was cut, everybody looking at each other. What was that? Wow. But to get back to your question, I finished that chapter, read the chapter, thought, I worked on a lot of movies. I could write a chapter for every movie that I worked on. So in free time, I kind of approached it sort of an episodic book, because almost every chapter is a book title, a movie title, sorry. So I would write a chapter, and lo and behold, eventually you get a book. Then I had to I'll put this in, I decided to limit it to the first film I did with my father, who was a world-renowned director of photography, up until the last film I did with him, which was about a 20-year period. And in the middle, we stopped working together. And that's a complicated personal story with an intergenerational love triangle. And I don't want to spoil my book, but I wound up not working for my dad for 15 years. And then I moved to California and did a TV movie of the week with him. So we started our career together and finished our career together. But in the middle, I worked with Scorsese, I worked with Jim Cameron, and then I took 4 or 5 years off from the business and became a charter boat skipper in the Virgin Islands. So that's the Virgin Islands and that part of the book's title. I've rambled enough to...
What I find fascinating is how you're just throwing around names: Bobby, Robert De Niro, Martin Scorsese. I just think that's so cool. I mean, growing up watching these movies, and as a teenager and as a kid, going out with my friends and busting balls and just quoting scenes from these iconic movies, and you were there. You got to meet these people. You got to bounce ideas off them and watch them when they didn't realize you were watching them. You were telling me that when De Niro was in that time period when he was filming Taxi Driver, you said he almost kind of took on that Travis Bickle type personality. Is not that he was running around shooting pimps, but he was very isolated, kept to himself, very quiet, less is more type of thing.
He was God's lonely man, as it says in the script. I never really got close to Bob on Taxi Driver because his character was God's lonely man, and so he kept that with him, I guess, 24/7, We did run into him, and when I say we, the camera department ran into him once during a lunch hour, and he was with his girlfriend, Diane Abbott, who had a very small part in the movie, playing the ticket taker at the porno. Um, so man, we just we're walking this way, and we all said hi to Bob, and he just nodded. Where in that kind of a situation with some other actor, a little more outgoing, gregarious, you'd stop, and everybody would make a little, wow, we're out, we're meeting off the set now. Yeah, it's great, it's cool, like we're just normal people, to be a little enthusiastic. But Bob was just hi, a little grin that he has, and that was it. I actually felt I got to know him a little bit better when we were doing Mean Streets, because no one really knew who he was then.
Right.
And the Mean Streets character was,
Johnny Boy
out there. Johnny Boy, he's out there. So I did one shot
in Mean Streets.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. And he also didn't have a persona to protect at that point. He wasn't as well known. He didn't have, I think.
I think Mean Streets was before Godfather 2.
Yeah.
So he hadn't won the Oscar. Like you said, that was his first break in a big, larger budget film.
There was another film. There was a baseball film he was in before that.
Bang the Drum Slowly.
Yes. Very good. Oh, you're up on it. You did some homework.
Oh no, that's lodged in there from.
That's in there.
Oh yeah, that's in there.
Yeah, he's good. There's another one of my favorite guys in there, Michael Moriarty.
Yes,
I believe was
Law
in
and Order.
Exactly. I did the Law and Order pilot, so I knew Michael from then.
Oh, that's cool. Boy, you do get around, huh?
If you last long enough, you're going to get around. If you're surviving, I've survived in the business for 50 years. I got a pin from my union to prove it. I didn't believe it. We said, we're announcing 50-year members, getting a little pin. My God, that means I'm how old?
I know, yeah. I know when I start quoting, I'm not quite as old as you, but when I start thinking about some of the things I was around, I'm like 30 years, 40 years just went like in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
When you were filming Taxi Driver, were you involved in like the shots where De Niro approaches the Secret Service agent, where he kind of tempts fate and he approaches the Secret Service agent?
Yeah, I was there. I was there every day. I didn't miss any of it. I may not remember it all, but I was there. Except now here, see, what I remember about that scene was nothing about the actors or the performance. What I remember is that we had to do a dolly shot, and we're working at the entrance to the park by Columbus Circle, the entrance to Central Park, near the circle there, and it's cobblestone. And they wanted to do a straight-in dolly, but we couldn't put dolly track down because at the beginning of the shot, we would have seen the other end of the dolly track. So what to do? They realized that with all the crowd moving around and everything, they could actually push the dolly on the cobblestones. And if you see the shot, if you watch for it, it does a little of this.
It bumps a little bit.
You're not watching for it if you're in the audience. You're involved in the movie. So that's, to me, it's like the memory is, wow, we dollied on cobblestone. No one's ever done that before.
But you're right. But who's going to take their eyes off of De Niro when he shows up with a mohawk? Because I think that's the first scene where he's wearing a mohawk and he's clapping odd and he's doing everything that someone that would be looking to hurt a presidential candidate wouldn't do to get the attention of the Secret Service. And then he goes up to him and just starts, can't remember the last digit of his zip code and giving out crazy names. And he looks like a lunatic. So obviously you were involved in that last scene where he approaches Harvey Keitel, Sport, outside the bar, and he just starts breaking his balls. And Keitel just doesn't recognize him, and he's either high or now he's got this mohawk. And was that ad-libbed, that scene, or was that tightly scripted?
I think a lot of that that scene was ad-libbed. I think the previous scene with De Niro and Keitel, I think they allowed some ad-libbing there too, and that was kind of courageous because it was, as I heard Marty in interviews say, it was such a tight script that you couldn't mess with it. You really couldn't. You remember the scene with the when they're on the date, Travis and Daisy, and they go by the drummer
Yeah, the guy with the
on
shoe
Broadway.
polish on his head, and he's just banging the
Yeah,
drums for nobody. No, and he's in the worst neighborhood in the world, and he's just banging those drums.
right. That wasn't scripted,
That was just,
but I
he was
don't.
just a character in Manhattan.
Yes, exactly. He's a street guy who's making spare change. I don't know what kind of musical background he had. He seemed to know his drummers' names. He knew the world of drumming, but I think Marty or one of the producers saw the guy and they said, "How do we get this guy into the film?" And where they put him, he said it was the only spot in the film where you could break out of the screenplay and just stick a little something like a vignette like that in. That's how tight the writing was.
That guy, that drummer's face appeared on a Facebook post, and a friend of mine who was a cop that grew up on the Upper East Side of Manhattan wrote a comment about it, and I reached out to him. I go, "Did you know that guy?" I thought the guy was an actor. He goes, "No." He goes, "He's a street performer. He was all over the place for decades, and he just, like you said, he just showed up in that film." And Scorsese's got a habit of doing that. I don't know if you know this. In the movie Casino, when Sharon Stone is throwing dice with that guy with like the Elvis wraparound glasses, and she's clipping chips from him, and then he catches her, and then she throws the chips in the air. He's not an actor. Scorsese saw him walking around the casino, and he was dressed like that, and Scorsese goes, "We need this guy." He didn't know if he could act, didn't know anything about him, but he knew he just looked that different that he could crowbar
You
him
know,
into a scene that would work.
you're reminding me of the similar situations from other movies. In the movie Doc that I did in Spain with that was Stacy Keach and Faye Dunaway,
Okay.
the director Frank Perry needed to cast. Well, he needed to cast a newspaper editor, small bit part, but instead of getting an actor, it was the same thing. They were at sitting at Elaine's, which was that
Right.
kind of show business restaurant on the east side, and a journalist by the name of Dan Greenberg walks in. I don't know if you remember that guy. I don't know what. I think he may have written for the Village Voice, and at the time he was married to Norma Ephron, who
Okay.
became writer director. But
Didn't
apparently
she?
Dan walks into the restaurant.
Didn't she eventually marry Nora Ephron? Eventually married the guy that wrote Goodfellas, Nicholas Pileggi.
Pelagi, I
Yeah.
believe so. Yeah. So Dan Greenberg walks in. Frank says, "I want that face in my movie." So that's an instance. Another instance in a New York movie called Goodbye Columbus with Dick
Oh yeah.
Benjamin and Ali MacGraw. One of my very first. There was supposed to be a big over-the-top Jewish wedding in the movie, and so to scout and to get some feel for it, the director took the key people, department heads, to an actual Jewish wedding at the Plaza Hotel. And he saw a big hulking looking guy there in a tuxedo that was a little too tight for him, looking like just so awkward. He says, "That's the brother." And they cast this guy. He was a med student he was an usher at the wedding. They cast him as Alan McGraw's brother. His only acting job, but when the movie was, sometime after the movie was over, he wrote a autobiographical book called Hello, Goodbye Columbus, Hello Medicine.
How
I don't
cool.
remember the actor's name, but he was a doctor. I suppose he still is a doctor.
And
So there
same
you go, casting people out of thin air.
Well, out of thin air, the guy that played Luca Brasi in Godfather, Coppola saw him hanging around the set in Brooklyn when they were filming a scene, and he said, "This guy looks like he could eat raw meat." And they said, "That's your Luca Brasi." They go, "Can he act?" He goes, "I don't care. He doesn't have to say much. He just let." And a lot of the stuff in the movie was just him being himself. I mean, obviously he wasn't that slow, but the guy was an ex-professional wrestler, and he was just kind of hanging around the movie set. And they said, that's your Luca Brasi."
Yeah, I love that they're directors that have the guts to do that
It
because
takes
they
a lot
take a
of balls.
chance. Yeah, exactly. They really do.
What was it like
I'm
to
sorry,
work?
I interrupted whatever the
No, no, no,
question
no,
was
no.
there.
Listen, I'm like a kid, just asking so many questions. What was it like to work for Scorsese?
You had well, let's put it this way: fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. Could have applied to any night of shooting a Taxi Driver. he was a ball of energy, and I've heard people say, yeah, he had a drug problem, blah 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 blah. And I've had kind of a bit of a debate with somebody on Facebook over this. Yeah, I know he had a drug problem when he went to Hollywood, and they were making New York, New York, and he was maybe a little out of his element. But I saw him. I think let me get a little more refined here. My argument with someone on Facebook is over Marty's performance as the guy in the back of the cab who talks about shooting his wife, who's up the window, the woman up in the window there. And it's a pretty intense little performance, which Scorsese didn't know he was going to do until about an hour before, because they had cast an actor for that scene. And the actor wound up in an accident of some kind and couldn't make it. So they needed somebody at the last minute. Marty said, I'll do it. But since I was in the front seat of the cab, keeping focus, I was there between takes, obviously. And I really didn't feel any time in the whole movie that Marty was out of control on cocaine. I really didn't. He's just energetic, but he was always energetic. I remembered him from film school. He was a professor at NYU, and he came and guest lectured for the other professor, Haig Manoogian, the sort of the iconic East Coast film educator. So I saw Marty at school. He was always this guy. They talk like this fast about whatever it was, And that was a story because the director of photography on Taxi, Michael Chapman, was also a guy who, talked like a mile a minute. And he was not a, drug user at all. But the two guys are just, you'd have to listen hard because chances are they were always talking about something in film history. Martin Scorsese's knowledge of film history is encyclopedic. I used to pride myself. I had a bunch of little pin-on buttons of obscure movie characters from the 30s and 40s, and I'd put them on trying to stump them, the Marty and the producers. Marty, he knew everybody. People that I didn't know except from reading the back of the button, he knew who that was. The film historian.
I can't wrap my head around you were in the cab when Scorsese is rambling on about killing his wife. So you're sitting next to De Niro, who's kind of looking over his shoulder, and he's like, "Did I tell you? Did I tell you?" People don't realize that Scorsese is a brilliant actor.
He's great.
I mean, he steals that movie quiz show at the very end of the movie where he plays the Geritol executive that's going to get pulled before that congressional committee, and he's sitting there with that actor Rob Morrow, and Morrow thinks he's gonna, scare the shit out of him, putting in jail, and Scorsese's he's got that shit-eating grin, and then he basically goes, "Do you want me to tell you how it is?" And he's got that rapid-fire succession, and it just, I was capped. I thought he should have gotten nominated for an Oscar, and I mean, obviously, it's like he's a brilliant. It's like saying, if Sandy Koufax could hit for power, would you have put him in the lineup? It's like, but he's the only left-handed pitcher that's striking out the world. Like, why mess with something that good? But Scorsese, people forget, Scorsese's a brilliant actor.
Well, have you seen Killers of the Flower Moon?
No.
His latest.
No, I have not.
He's got a big scene at the end of the movie.
Really? Well,
and he does, just great. Just great. Yeah.
I know he cast his late parents in a lot of his films. Was his mother around and his dad around? Because I know that his mom used to cook a lot of times for the set.
Not on Taxi Driver. No, I got to appreciate his parents. I won't say I got to know them, but I got to appreciate them when we shot Italian American. Because I was up in their apartment, I think, for two solid days of shooting. So you get to, you get to really appreciate. I was just like a kind of a fly on the wall kind of guy.
Right.
I had the camera, but it was all Marty's. Marty's doing the interview, so I'm just kind of listening and trying to pay enough attention to know who's, where should I pan? Because sometimes you don't always want to be on the person that's speaking. You want to pan over and see what she's thinking as he's talking, But that was a great experience. But she came on the sets a little more often, I gathered, later on in his career. And she was in almost everything that he did. She was a great
And she was
personality.
good.
Yeah. The father, Charlie, I know he was in
Goodfellas.
Goodfellas. He played a hitman, but he was he's very good in Italian American. He kind of breaks the ice. But the thing that I remember from that film was his father had a habit of taking his thumbnail and putting it on his tooth and doing like this. And I don't know if it was to relieve tension, but every now and then I would look over and I'd see Marty doing the same thing. And it wasn't something I ever saw him do otherwise. So I could see this was like Marty trying to tune in to his dad and just feel what his dad is feeling. That to me was fascinating. I don't even remember that it made its way into the film, to tell you the truth, but
it's just one of those things you remember.
Yeah, just stuck with me.
You told me you filmed a lot of the outside shots of Mean Streets in Little Italy. Now, knowing what I know about Little Italy, I'm sure a couple of palms had to have been greased for you guys to be down there filming around, because that's where you had all the mob social clubs back then.
No, you'd think so, but no. First of all, Mean Streets was made for like $600,000, and half of that budget went to the music track. So there really wasn't very much money for paying anybody off. You think of that track. I mean, one of the producer of the film is Jonathan Taplin, who prior to that was a record producer. So Marty really kind of exploited that connection, and Jonathan came through with fantastic music track. So with $300,000 left, there wasn't a lot to grease palms. Plus, that second unit stuff at the street festival was shot before they came into New York to do the first unit. So no one knew that this movie was coming to Little Italy. That's point number one. Point number two, Little Italy and New York University are neighbors. So, and it's a rich neighborhood visually, So the people who lived there were accustomed to seeing film students, little groups of 3 or 4 people and a little camera. That's part of this, it's part of the scenery. So they didn't really pay us much mind. What Marty had to be careful though, because they knew who he was.
Oh yeah.
He stayed in the van. He stayed in the equipment van, and he would make storyboards, as he did for, I think, all of his movies. He'd make little storyboards. He'd say, okay, here's what you're going to go out and get. And so he'd give me 6 storyboards, and I would take the camera and the camera assistant, and we go to these spots that he told us, and then we get those shots and come back. I mean, if I saw something I like, I gave it to him, and those things are in the movie too, little visual vignettes. But that's how we did the whole thing. He didn't come out of the van until the last shot, which we got up on some kind of a platform, and then he said, point the camera up to that window up there, and we had put a brighter light. We knew we were going to do this, so we put a brighter light bulb in the ceiling fixture, and that's the last shot of the movie. The camera's up, and then you see a hand come and pull the shade down, and then the credits roll on that.
You guys were just small enough that they didn't realize who you were, because I can absolutely guarantee you, if they thought it was a Hollywood film and you had capos and mob bosses of all the 5 families down there, the Gambinos had a large presence, Cingiganti had a large presence down there. I mean, Manny the Horse Aniello owned Umberto's Clam House, where Joe Gallo got killed. There was so many mobsters down there. I mean, big heavyweights that were into everything. If they would have figured out that this wasn't an NYU production and a Hollywood budget, they would have squeezed. I'm telling you, they would have squeezed the hell out of you guys.
I don't doubt that may have happened a few weeks later when they came in with the first unit, and then they were putting lights up in the streets and doing a real movie. So I know that there had to be some kind of a relationship with the community there.
Relationship, yeah, a one-way relationship.
Yeah. So there had to be something, but then I guess maybe they budgeted that in, because I'm sure Marty knew what to expect. because
Do you
this
have
was,
any?
he did the whole,
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, and you're right. That's why he laid low and kind of hung out in the van and made his presence
yeah,
known only when he had to.
yeah.
Do you have any stories about Harvey Keitel? Because he's a great actor.
I don't really.
Peter Boyle.
No, I didn't get in. I didn't really develop a relationship with him. I have a very clear memory of the one scene. There's really one scene in Taxi Driver that Bob De Niro is not in, and that's the dance between
Sport.
Sport. I'm confusing it with Shorty is Marty's character in Mean Streets. Yeah, Sport and Jodie Foster. That dancing sequence was. I'm gonna. No, I'm not. I'm gonna spoil some of my book, but I'm gonna jump back. I'm gonna jump back to something because you're very free and relaxed. Jumping back to you asked me about working for Scorsese, and I want to, and the high speed Marty. This is a shot we did of, and this is in my memoir, but I'm going to spoil it. This is a shot of De Niro walking toward the camera on Broadway on the way to the date. So he's kind of got good clothes on, and Marty wanted to set him apart from the rest of the crowd on the street. So this is Broadway in the lower 60s, I think we were. So they decided to use a long lens. Well, long lens will give you a very narrow scope of view. And in addition to that, anything not right where you're putting the focus will be very out of focus. You know what that telephoto kind of thing looks like. They call it bokeh. All the lights in the background are just big circles, So the depth of field or the amount of picture that's going to be in focus on a long lens like that is maybe from here to here in an actor. Right? Not very much. And as the camera assistant, I've got to keep him in focus. So, and it was a long walk. It was like a 120-foot walk. Lots of opportunities for me to make a mistake and go soft. If the shot is sharp all the way, then you're not aware that the camera assistant was doing any work. So I'm going to digress from my digression. Technically, how we accomplished this, since it wasn't a dialogue scene, we stationed a guy with a walkie-talkie like every 20 feet, and I had marks on the ground every 20 feet, and marks on the lens every 20 feet. So a guy would call on the walkie, okay, he's 80 feet, 60 feet, and I'm turning the lens to keep my numbers in the lens corresponding to what they're telling me. Now to make this more of a ulcer-producing shot for the camera assistant, they decided to shoot it in slow motion. So that if I made a mistake in the focus, it would be on the screen for twice as long as it might ordinarily have been. So you really get a good shot at seeing my screw up. Fortunately, I didn't screw up. And at the end of the take, by the way, he's in a close-up, so it's just focused from nose to the back of the eye. So, and I had him, and I was kind of proud of myself. I didn't cut the camera right away because even before I could, Marty, who was sitting just off camera, jumps in front of the camera to signal the next setup. Remember that we're shooting in slow motion. He jumps out, and we're going to go over here. Blah, blah, blah. Next day in dailies, Marty in slow motion looks like a normal human being. But that's what it's like working for Scorsese, a Taxi Driver. You gotta cut his speed down in half, and he's like normal. He's like you then.
Yeah, I wouldn't have gotten the impression he was a drug addict at all. I always thought he's just a hyperactive guy. He's just so passionate about what he does, and he's like you said, he's got all that knowledge. He just can't. It's like a funnel trying to get out of his mouth. He's got so much stuff in his head to project it out to other people to kind of think like he thinks or do what he wants to get them to do. So how did you wind up on the set of The Terminator? That's a Hollywood film, right? So it was filmed out.
Yeah. Well, after the whole thing of taking a sailboat from New York to Florida, and I worked on Jaws 2 in Florida, onward to the Virgin Islands, became a charter boat captain. It's in the book. When it's time to no longer be a charter captain, and you kind of know for yourself when that happens because you realize you're living this sybaritic, luxurious lifestyle on a yacht in the vacation capitals of the world, going sailing for a living, you're living hand to mouth at the same time. You're not making any money. You're not putting anything in the bank, and you're not getting Social Security. You're getting nothing. So I thought, okay, I really should get back into real life. And I didn't want to go back to New York and just kind of try and pick it up there. I wanted to go to California, where the film business really is. I thought, I shouldn't have said that. Cut that part out. Just kidding. And so I got to New York, got to California, and I couldn't get in the union. At that point, you had a East Coast, West Coast, and center of the country, 3 different locals for camera people, and they did not like to share. They're very territorial. So if I wanted to work in the film business, I had to work non-union. I had a friend in Los Angeles by the name of Amy Jones, who, flashback to Taxi Driver, was the silhouette of the woman in the window. Okay? Amy Jones. Also, Martin Scorsese's personal assistant, not assistant director, but his appointment maker and make sure he gets, personal assistant. Also a very fine film editor in her own right. She had written a screenplay because she wanted to direct. She got Roger Corman interested in it, and her husband then shot like a trailer, a teaser for it. And they got me to come on as assistant cameraman for a one-day shoot, one-night shoot, really. One scene out of this horror movie. Roger Corman liked it, budgeted a film for her called Slumber Party Massacre, written by Rita Mae. I can't remember. Rita Mae. I'm sorry, I shouldn't.
No, you're fine.
Start a name that I can't finish. So we shot this low-budget film, and Roger was very happy with it. Amy promoted me from camera assistant to camera operator because she trusted me from Taxi Driver. Then when she got her next film, Love Letters, which is the Jamie Lee Curtis starring film, she hired me as director of photography. So I had, that was the beginnings of a career. And then along the line, during the same time period, I met a DP, director of photography, by the name of Adam Greenberg, who was also working non-union at that time. He was working for Canon Films. He hired me to be his camera assistant. So I knew him. Then I moved up to operator. He got the movie Terminator. He needed a B camera operator for 15 or 20 days on it. So he asked me to do it. It was a non-union film. I think they spent $6 million on it and made plenty. Wow. But that was a great experience. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a peach. Jim Cameron, beautiful, creative. I can remember when I met them, we had a kind of a table read of all the department heads, or they consider me a department head as a camera assistant. And everyone had read the script. This is all non-union film people making their way up. It was the first time that everybody looked around the room and agreed, this is going to be a hit. This is a can't miss script. And then they brought in Jim and his wife, Gail Ann Hurd, who was producing. And they just seemed like the sweetest, tall, but the sweetest people you could ever hope to meet. And I will not forget the first time the entire Terminator skeleton came out on the set, the big chromium, full-sized. It was a $300,000 prop on a $6 million movie. The first time it came out was the first time that Gail had seen it, and she broke into tears on the set. She was that emotionally attached to her movie. So I got a lot of memories from Terminator. And
that was one of those
when you work on and when you work on Terminator or you work on a Taxi Driver, I mean, here I am talking to you. And I think, these movies like that are the reason why. I lost count of the number of camera assistant jobs I got because I did the focus on Taxi Driver. You did Taxi Driver? We want you. Or maybe just because they wanted to hear stories. I don't know.
I got a name for your next book.
Cool.
I don't want to blow it for you. I don't want to, somebody to steal it. I'm gonna write it down now so when we get off camera. I got a couple ideas for you. Alec,
Wonderful.
I want to thank you so much for taking this time out and spending this with us today. Please, again, show us your book. Tell us about it, where we can find it.
What the Camera Didn't See. It's on Amazon. It's a Kindle book, so you can either get a printed copy or you can get a digital copy. The back cover, photo by Brian Hamill. It's a guy you might want to interview. Real New York film guy. Did all the Woody Allen movies. So did I say it's available on Amazon? You can just put my name in the search, or What the Camera Didn't See.
And again,
this has been a thrill for me.
Oh, well,
I really
listen. We can do this again. You strike me as the stories would just keep coming. So, folks, please check out Alec Hirschfeld.
Here's another visual for you.
What is that?
This is my mug. I don't know if you can read it. This is the mug that everybody in the crew got from Marty for doing Taxi Driver.
Oh,
so I can shade it or something.
That's really cool. So Scorsese gave that out
as
a gift.
Those are Marty's gifts. Okay.
No.
Now I'm done with surprises.
No. Listen, I love memorabilia. It's fine. Folks, please check out Alec Hirschfeld's book, What the Camera Didn't See, A Cameraman's Journey from Denmark, Spain, Hollywood, the Caribbean, and back. It's a great read for those who want an inside look. It went on some of the great movies of the century. Alec Hirschfeld, thank you again for having us on the show. That's his book. As always, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Tampa, Florida, Greenwich, Connecticut, Sydney, South Wales, Russellville, Arkansas, Carmel, California, and East Peoria, Illinois. If you work in law enforcement or have an interesting criminal background and would like to be a guest on the show, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you enjoyed the content, please check out my Amazon author page. Type in my name, Vic Ferrari, like the car, where you'll be able to preview all my behind-the-scenes NYPD books for free. Alec Hirschfeld, again, thank you so much for coming on, and I'll have another episode out next week. Thank you.
Well done.
Alec, that was great.